The weight of silence. With his face pressed into the muddy lawn and handcuffs biting into his wrists, Elias understood that the woman he had betrayed was not saving him from the debt collector. She was saving herself by sacrificing them both. The brass key to his salvation sat in Clara's waterproof bag, locked away forever. Behind him, the police spotlights turned the backyard into a stage where everyone was guilty. 3 days earlier, on an evening when the house was filled with amber lamplight and the weight of secrets, everything had been different. Or perhaps it had never been different at all. Perhaps this moment in the mud had always been written into their story. The master bedroom was silent, except for the rhythmic clicking of the safe dial beneath Elias's pale fingers. He knelt on the plush cream carpet, his knuckles white as he gripped the silver dial, pulling it slowly through the combination that had worked for 3 years. 14, 22, 09. The shadows stretched long across the room, cast by a single amber bedside lamp that struggled against the gathering darkness outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The black steel safe sat behind a mahogany cabinet door, heavy and immovable, a fortress within the fortress of their home. Elias had designed it that way deliberately. Everything in this room had been designed deliberately. The Italian sheets, the watercolor above the dresser, even the marriage itself had been carefully constructed, piece by piece, until it resembled something real. He completed the combination with trembling precision. 14, 22, 09. The numbers meant something. An anniversary, a date, a private language between him and his wife. He pulled the handle downward with both hands, expecting the familiar give of the bolt retracting. Instead, it didn't budge. The handle remained locked tight, unyielding. Elias's breath caught. He tried again. Jerky movements this time, more force applied, desperation seeping into his shoulders. The handle remained as if it had been welded shut. Above the dial, a digital screen flashed red text in a font that seemed designed to mock him. Access denied. His mind raced through possibilities. A malfunction, a security update. He pulled a crumpled yellow sticky note from his inner jacket pocket, the one he kept hidden in his desk drawer, the one where he'd written their anniversary in his own slanted handwriting. 05-12-88. He'd written it years ago, back when the anniversary still meant something worth preserving on paper. Back when Clara had trusted him enough to sleep in this room without locking the safe against him. Elias punched the numbers into the digital keypad with a trembling index finger. 5-12-88. The screen flashed red again, and this time a high-pitched beeping erupted from the safe. Rapid, accusatory, shrill. Above the keypad, new text appeared in harsh red lettering. Locked, 24 hours. The beeping continued, and Elias did not move to silence it. He remained on his knees on the cream carpet, his reflection visible in the polished surface of the mahogany cabinet door. Red light from the safe screen reflected off his glasses, making him look like something mechanical, something that had short-circuited and was now sparking its death. Clara knew about the offshore accounts. That was the only explanation. Clara, who had never asked questions about his business trips to Zurich, who had accepted his explanations about consulting fees and investment diversification without the kind of scrutiny that wives usually applied. Clara, who had been so perfectly, remarkably incurious about where the money came from and where it went. The beeping stopped after a minute, replaced by a profound silence that felt worse than the alarm. Elias stood slowly, his knees cracking, and walked downstairs. The living room was exactly as it always was, carefully decorated in a style that magazines called contemporary minimalist, but which Elias privately understood to be cold and calculated. High-backed velvet chairs in charcoal gray, a glass coffee table that he'd always found impractical. Abstract paintings that Clara's decorator had chosen because she understood what people of their income level should display on their walls. Clara sat in one of the velvet chairs, perfectly still, perfectly composed. She wore a navy dress that Elias recognized from a Bergdorf Goodman shopping trip he had funded but not witnessed. Her hair was pulled back in a style that suggested she had been to a salon that afternoon. In her lap was a blue folder. Not a folder he recognized. Not a folder from his office or his desk or anywhere he had stored anything. A folder that had come from somewhere else, brought from somewhere else, placed deliberately in this room to wait for this moment. As Elias entered, Clara dropped a single glossy photograph onto the glass coffee table. The sound it made, a sharp slap against the glass, seemed to echo through the room like a gunshot. The photograph showed Elias, unmistakably. He wore a camel hair coat and stood next to a blonde woman in front of a building with Banque de Suisse etched into the stone facade. The woman was Dr. Helga Vogel. The date stamp on the back was 17 months ago. His face in the photo appeared friendly, collaborative, almost intimate in the way he was angled toward her. "The safe code was the date you opened it, Elias," Clara said, her voice like flint scraping against ice. "Not our wedding." She didn't raise her voice. That was what made it worse. She didn't scream or cry or throw the folder at him. She simply sat in her velvet chair, her hands folded in her lap, and delivered the statement as if reading from a script she had memorized during countless drives between here and the salon. Elias's mind fractured into 1,000 pieces. The safe code. The combination he had punched into the digital pad every time he needed to access the reconciliation gift. The bracelet he had ordered from Cartier 3 weeks ago when he realized his behavior had finally crossed a line that even he could not explain away. The bracelet that cost $42,000 and was supposed to restore something that had been damaged beyond restoration. The safe code was the date he had opened the offshore account. May 12th, 1988. The day he had first betrayed her, technically. The day he had first met Dr. Vogel and understood that Clara's father needed experimental treatment that would cost more than Clara knew, more than he could legitimately access, more than he could explain. Elias lunged for the blue folder. Clara anticipated him. She had always been smarter than he gave her credit for, smarter in ways that didn't show on her face or in her voice until moments like these, and stood abruptly, turning her body away. The folder came with her, and she shoved him backward with a force that surprised him. His hip caught the edge of the glass table, and he fell hard, the wind leaving his lungs in a sharp gasp. The impact of his body against furniture should have hurt more than it did. Pain was secondary to the realization that had seized him. Clara was not upset. Clara was not hurt. Clara was executing something. He recovered quickly, drawing on some reserve of desperation or instinct or pure animal survival, and grabbed her wrists. Her wrists were small and delicate, and had always seemed to require protection. But she twisted them away from him with surprising strength. When he tried to pin her arms, she kicked him sharply in the shin with her leather heel. The Gucci heels she wore to charity galas, the ones that cost more than most people's car payments. Pain shot up his leg, genuine pain this time, but he didn't let go. He pressed her against the wall next to a tall floor lamp, the lamp that had been a gift from his mother and that Clara had never quite forgiven him for accepting. The lamp wobbled dangerously, the light flickering in the struggle, creating strobing shadows that made the room look like the set of a horror film. Clara's face was close to his now, close enough that he could see the absolute absence of emotion in her eyes. Not anger, not betrayal, not even conviction. Her face had the blank look of someone performing a necessary task, like someone draining a pool before the season's end. She slammed her forehead into his nose. The pain was immediate and total. Bright white stars exploded across his vision. Blood sprayed across his white dress shirt. The shirt he had worn to meet with Dr. Vogel 3 weeks ago. The shirt he had been wearing when he decided that his wife's father's life was worth more than his wife's trust. The blood bloomed across the fabric in expanding circles, warm and immediate and entirely real. Elias recoiled, clutching his face, feeling the warm liquid seeping between his fingers. The room tilted. When his vision cleared enough to see, Clara was already running toward the kitchen door, the blue folder clutched against her chest like a shield. He stumbled after her, trying to follow, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. One shin was already swelling where her heel had connected. His nose felt like it had been shattered. Was it shattered? Could you tell by feel if a bone was broken? He'd never broken anything before in his entire carefully controlled life. The kitchen was all granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The kitchen of people who did not cook, who merely displayed their capacity to purchase expensive things. Clara leaned against the granite island, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling in rapid succession. Her hands were shaking. Good. Elias thought this. Her hands were shaking. That meant something. That meant she wasn't as controlled as she appeared. But then she ripped open the blue folder. Inside was not what Elias expected. There were no bank statements, no evidence of the offshore accounts, no paper trail of his deception. Instead, there was a small black leather book with Log 2024 embossed in gold leaf across the cover. The gold caught the overhead fluorescent light and threw small reflections across the kitchen's pristine surfaces. Clara flipped to the center of the book, her hands still trembling. Her mouth opened slightly as she read, and then her hand came up to cover it entirely. The other hand started to shake so badly that the pages began to flutter. It was not bank accounts. It was medical records. Patient Arthur Vance, her father, and beneath his name, line after line of receipts dating back 3 years. Experimental treatment, Stage 4, Dr. Helga Vogel, Zurich. Additional treatment, advanced immunotherapy protocol. Supplemental medications, $1,800. Ongoing monitoring, $3,200 per month. Arthur Vance had stage 4 cancer. Clara's father had been dying for 3 years, and nobody had told her. The betrayal structured itself in her mind in layers. Elias knowing, her father knowing, Dr. Vogel knowing. An entire conspiracy of silence, built specifically around her, designed to keep her excluded from information about her own father's mortality. She flipped to the next page. There was a handwritten note in a handwriting she recognized. Elias's slanted, messy scrawl. The words were dated from 2 years ago. Arthur signed everything over to Elias in exchange for silence. The woman in Zurich was not a lover. She was an oncologist. The bank transactions were not for another woman. They were for her father's life. And her father had traded his autonomy, his finances, everything to Elias in exchange for her not knowing that he was dying. In the other room, Elias was coughing. The sound of his pain seemed very far away. The rain came later, sometime after midnight, after Elias had cleaned his nose and tried to explain things that Clara was not interested in hearing. After Clara had called her father and received only voicemail. After Elias had gone to bed and Clara had sat alone on the living room sofa with the black ledger open in her lap. The rain came as a downpour, violent and merciless, transforming the gravel driveway into a swamp of mud and pebbles. A black SUV idled in that gravel, its engine running, its headlights cutting through the rain in harsh white shafts. Elias stepped out of the house first. His nose was taped with a white bandage, a careful, professional-looking bandage that he'd applied in the bathroom mirror while staring at a man he no longer recognized. A man in a gray tracksuit stepped out of the SUV. His name was Marcus. He worked for people who were not listed in any corporate directory. Marcus held a telescopic steel baton, and when he extended it with a sharp snap of his wrist, the sound was like the breaking of a bone. "The Dr. Vogel payment bounced, Elias," Marcus said. His voice was flat, the kind of flat that came from speaking to many people who were about to die, who had made bad decisions, who had believed that they could solve problems by hiding money in places far from their actual lives. "Your father-in-law's debt is now yours." The baton swung forward. It caught the porch light first, and glass rained down onto the brick. A kind of delayed storm, smaller and more localized than the rainfall that continued its assault on the driveway. The light that had illuminated the front entrance of the house died. Then Marcus grabbed Elias by the throat and slammed him against the brick wall itself. The mortar was old, the bricks worn from decades of weather. Elias felt his spine compress against the unforgiving surface, felt the air leave his lungs. Elias kicked off the wall. His knee found Marcus's groin with the kind of accuracy that only comes from pure desperation. Marcus doubled over, his grip loosening, and Elias ran. He sprinted down the driveway toward the woods that bordered the property. His feet splashed through muddy puddles that had formed in the low spots of the gravel, each splash sending droplets of water in wide arcs. Behind him, he could hear Marcus's breathing, ragged, angry, but still functional. Marcus recovered quickly. He pulled a heavy flashlight from his belt, the kind that police officers carried, the kind that could be used as a weapon or tool with equal effectiveness. He began a methodical walk after Elias, tapping the steel baton against his palm in a rhythm that sounded almost musical. Tap, 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 a countdown, an approaching deadline. The beam of the flashlight cut through the wet tree trunks, a circular slice of illumination that danced across the forest floor, searching. Clara moved through the property with the confidence of someone who had spent years walking these grounds. She knew where the rusted garden shed was, the one that Elias had threatened to demolish 3 summers ago, but had never quite gotten around to removing. She knew the shortcuts through the landscaped areas, the places where the security lights didn't quite reach, the shadows between the manicured portions of the property and the wild woods beyond. She found Elias crouched behind the shed. He was soaked, his clothes clinging to his chest, his breath coming in gasps that sounded like sobs. His eye was beginning to swell where Marcus's thumb had nearly found purchase. Clara pulled him into the shadows behind the rusted metal. The rain drummed against the roof of the shed, a steady percussion that almost drowned out the sound of Marcus's footsteps on the gravel, and then on the softer ground of the property's margins. She was holding a small brass key. It was the kind of key that opened storage units in climate-controlled facilities. It had a plastic tag attached. Storage Unit 402. "My father didn't sign it all over to you," Clara whispered. She was looking at Elias, and in her eyes was a calculation so cold that it made him shiver more than the rain. He kept one account. This is the key to his legacy. Elias reached for the key. His fingers extended toward it with the kind of hunger that comes from understanding that you are about to lose everything. Clara pulled it back, clutching it to her chest. She stared into his eyes, and Elias understood in that moment that she was looking for something. Not the man she had married, but evidence of whether he was worth saving or whether he was simply another piece of furniture in her life that had outlived its usefulness. The flashlight beam swept past the shed, missing them by inches. For a moment, the beam held on a section of the corrugated metal wall, illuminating the rust and the peeling paint. And then it swept onward. Elias leaned his head against the corrugated metal. It was cold and rough against his skin. From his inner pocket, he pulled a letter. The paper was damp from rain and sweat, the ink beginning to bleed at the edges. The handwriting was Arthur's, Clara's father's, the same handwriting that appeared on every check she'd ever received from him, every birthday card, every note left on the kitchen counter. Clara read the letter. Her hand covered her mouth. The words were simple and devastating. Elias, thank you for taking the fall in 19. The money is safe. Clara must never know I was the architect. Outside the shed, Marcus called out, Elias, I see your tracks. His voice carried the certainty of someone who knew exactly where his prey was located. Clara dropped the letter. The paper fluttered to the ground, settling into a puddle that was already forming on the shed's concrete floor. The man she had spent the last 3 years defending, her father, the man she believed had raised her alone after her mother's death, the man she had built her entire understanding of family loyalty around, was the architect of everything. Arthur had designed the embezzlement. Arthur had decided that Elias should take the fall for it. Arthur had used his daughter's husband as a shield, and Elias had agreed. She looked at Elias. His face in the dim light was hollowed out. He was staring at her with eyes that contained nothing but the knowledge of complete and utter destruction. The shed door was kicked open with a force that bent the hinges and sent the corroded metal screaming. Marcus stood in the opening, a flashlight in his left hand that blinded them completely, turning them both into silhouettes. The baton was in his right hand, and he swung it immediately, an economical movement that showed practice and expertise. The baton caught Elias on the shoulder, a solid blow that would have broken bone if delivered at a slightly different angle. The pain was immense and specific and entirely real. Elias's cry echoed in the confined space of the shed. Clara grabbed a heavy garden trowel from a workbench. She didn't think about it. There was no thought process that occurred between the moment she saw the trowel and the moment she stabbed it into Marcus's forearm. The trowel met resistance, then gave, then came free. Blood began flowing immediately, pooling into the sleeve of his tracksuit. Marcus dropped the flashlight. The shed descended into near-total darkness, interrupted only by the rapid strobing of the light as it bounced across the corrugated metal floor. Sparks seemed to fly, though there was no source for them. Or perhaps the darkness was so complete that any movement at all created the illusion of light. Elias tackled Marcus, driving him backward into a stack of terracotta pots that had been stored in the corner. The pots had been there for years, waiting for a spring planting that never came. They shattered under Marcus's weight, a sound like the breaking of pottery from an archaeological dig, ancient and final. They wrestled in the fragments of terracotta. Blood and dirt mixed on their skin. Elias found Marcus's face in the darkness and drove his fist toward it repeatedly, each blow connecting with a sound that reverberated in the small space. Marcus fought back with equal desperation, his hands finding Elias's throat, his legs driving upward looking for purchase. Marcus got a thumb into Elias's eye. The pain was not pain. It was something beyond pain, something that belonged to a different category of suffering. Elias screamed, a pure animal sound that belonged to no human being. He recoiled. Marcus found the baton again. It had landed during the initial tackle, and raised it over his head for a finishing blow. His silhouette loomed large against the open doorway, backlit by the rain-washed night sky. Clara held up her phone. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. It displayed an active call to 911, the timer running. Duration 04:12. The sirens had been growing louder for the last minute, approaching from the main road, getting closer with each passing second. "I didn't call for help, Marcus," Clara said. Her voice was completely calm. "I called them to report an embezzlement in progress, with Elias's confession letter in my pocket." Marcus's arm froze in mid-swing. The sirens became louder. Red and blue lights began reflecting off the wet leaves outside the shed, painting everything in alternating colors. Elias looked at Clara. He understood now that she wasn't saving him from Marcus. She was clearing the board. Both Marcus and Elias would go away. The debt would be settled, either through Marcus's arrest or through his retreat. But either way, the threat would be removed from her life. And Elias would be removed as well. Not by Marcus's baton, but by the police lights that were painting the property in red and blue. The sirens reached maximum volume. The tires of the police vehicles screeched as they took the turn into the driveway far too quickly. Two officers tackled Elias as he tried to stand. His face was pressed into the mud of the backyard. He tasted soil and something metallic. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists, with a sound like finality itself being manufactured. The click was sharp and precise, a sound of doors closing, of choices being made, of a life being redirected into different channels. "Get down! Stay down!" the officers shouted. But Elias was already down. He couldn't get much lower. He was at ground level, which was the only place lower than where he had started. Clara stood 10 feet away, her coat wrapped tight against the rain. The security lights that ringed the property illuminated her in stark white, making her look like an actress on a stage, the scene being performed for an audience that existed only in her imagination. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the brass key and the confession letter. She opened a waterproof bag. Where had she gotten a waterproof bag? He realized she must have been planning this, actually planning this moment down to small practical details like waterproof bags and storage units. She turned her back on him. She walked toward the house, and her shadow stretched long in front of her, growing larger as she moved away from the light, then smaller as she approached the house's darkness. The police station's interrogation room was painted white, a white that was not quite clean. It had been cleaned, certainly, but the cleaning had failed to address the structural damage to the paint near the baseboards, which had begun to peel in small vertical strips that suggested moisture issues somewhere behind the walls. Elias sat at a metal table. A paper cup of cold coffee sat in front of him. The coffee had developed a thin film on its surface, and the color was the color of dishwater after a large meal. His eyes were bloodshot from 22 hours of no sleep and 15 hours of interrogation. A detective whose name he had not learned sat across from him. The detective was sliding a legal pad across the table. "We're having trouble establishing a clear chain of custody for the evidence Ms. Clara provided," the detective was saying. "The recordings from the safe security system are not legally admissible as far as the DA is concerned. We have your fingerprints on financial documents, but without the ledger itself." Elias was not listening. He was thinking about the safe. He was thinking about the combination he had tried first. 14-22-09. He was thinking about what his fingers had hoped that combination would open. 14-22-09. Not the date he had opened the offshore account. Not any account. 14 was the month designation he used for all his hidden camera installations, the code he used in his personal log. 22 was his second code, the one that corresponded to the placement location. 09 meant the 9th location he'd set up observation equipment in their house. He had installed a hidden camera in Clara's study office 1 month ago. He had wanted to see what she did when she thought no one was watching. He had wanted to understand the nature of her phone calls, the whispered conversations she took late at night, the files she was accessing on her laptop. He had wanted to know. And the camera, connected to cloud storage because he understood that physical security was the weakest kind of security, had recorded Clara yesterday evening. It had recorded her opening the black ledger. It had recorded her reading through the pages, her hands shaking. It had recorded her removing the pages one by one and feeding them into the shredder. Not their household shredder, but a commercial-grade one that she must have had delivered to the house specifically for this purpose. The camera had continued recording as she burned the remaining pages in the fireplace in the study. She had used accelerant, probably the kind of accelerant used for grills. The paper had curled and blackened and turned to ash. Elias smiled. "Look inside the AC vent in your study. It saw you burning the ledger last night. It's cloud-synced." The microphone distorted his voice, made him sound like he was speaking from another dimension. The static on the line seemed to increase whenever he spoke, as if the machinery itself was trying to muffle him. Clara's face paled. Her hand, which had been resting lightly on the ledge in front of her, began to tremble. All of the power that she had accumulated over the last 2 days, the power of certainty, the power of leverage, the power of knowledge, dissolved in an instant. She realized she had not been playing chess. She had been playing checkers, and she had been playing it against someone who had spent years studying the game. The door to the visitation room opened. A guard gestured. The visit was over. Clara stood. She looked at Elias through the plexiglass for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back through the door. The charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence provided by Clara to establish a clear embezzlement. The security footage from Elias's hidden camera, once discovered by the authorities, could have proven that Clara had destroyed evidence. It was a standoff. No one moved. No one pressed forward. Everyone stepped back. The parking lot outside the police station stretched empty in the sunset. The sky was orange and red, the kind of sunset that looked like fire at the horizon, like the world was burning in slow motion at a distance that never quite approached. Clara was waiting by their silver Mercedes when Elias walked out. She held the car keys out to him. The keys hung from a small chain, and they caught the light as his hand closed around them. Elias dropped a small thumb drive into Clara's palm. She had expected this. She closed her fingers around it. They were bound now, not by love. That had died somewhere in the shed, or perhaps even earlier, on the evening when he had decided that her father's life was worth more than her trust. They were bound by the evidence they had on each other. They were bound by mutual assured destruction. Clara dropped the brass key into his hand. The metal was cool and specific. It represented something, access to her father's remaining account, to whatever money Arthur had managed to preserve when he thought he was dying. It also represented something else, the fact that her father was still alive. The cloud-synced files on Elias's backup system did not only contain footage of Clara burning the ledger, they also contained weeks of footage showing Clara receiving phone calls from her father. Multiple phone calls, recent phone calls, calls that had taken place after he was supposed to be in terminal decline. "Are we redeemed, Elias?" Clara asked. The question hung in the space between them, heavy and unanswerable. "No," Elias said. His voice was rough from disuse and interrogation. "We're just finished." He opened the passenger door for her. She got in, settling herself carefully in the leather seat as if it might poison her. The door closed with a soft click. Elias walked around to the driver's side. The sun was lower now, painting everything in deeper orange tones. As he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw a photograph taped to the dashboard. It was their wedding photo. It was Clara's doing. She must have placed it there while he was in custody. The photo showed them both smiling, young, trusting, utterly convinced that they understood each other. The photo showed people who did not yet understand that understanding is the first thing to die in marriage. The engine purred to life. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the evening traffic. The wedding photo fluttered slightly as the car accelerated. The edges curled and yellowed from the heat of the parking lot, or from time, or from the weight of everything it represented. On the back of the photo, written in Clara's careful handwriting, "Our Tioma." The name was nearly illegible as the car moved, as the light shifted, as the moment passed into history. The car disappeared into the flow of traffic, taillights blending with other taillights, becoming indistinguishable from all the other vehicles carrying people toward destinations they had chosen or had chosen them. The silver Mercedes became just another car among thousands, each carrying its own burden of secrets, its own archive of compromises, its own private arrangement of what love had become. In the distance, the sun touched the horizon and began its descent. The sky transitioned from orange to purple. The world continued its indifferent rotation. The photograph on the dashboard continued its flutter and rest, recording nothing but the passage of time.